Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Alrighty. What's up, guys? McJibbin here, back with another reaction video. I love you to subscribe. My name's Connor. Hello. Hit the subscribe button. Join the Discord, guys. Everyone join the Discord. It just makes it easier overall for me to react. Not react, for me to see your recommendations and to just interact with you guys overall. So definitely get in there. Thank you guys so much. I want to say I really appreciate it. I'm over 500 subs, and everyone has been so nice and not as nice, but helpful. Going on the internet, you know, YouTube, putting, you know, yourself out there and stuff. I had some bad expectations, a little, but it's been very pleasant, honestly. You guys are so helpful and everything, and knowledgeable too, giving great answers to my questions and everything. So yeah, keep it up. I love doing it. All right, let's do this. World War II animated Western Front. Oh, where are my manners again? This is Thomas Cochrane. He's kind of my random historical figure of the day that's going to sit here and do this with me. I watched Kings and Generals video on him. It was really fascinating. Yeah, so he's right there. He's going to be watching with us. Let's do it.
June 1944. The Allies had been long preparing to launch an invasion of German-held Europe, and now all was finally ready. For the invasion, they had gathered more than 2 million men. The Germans could only muster a force of less than half the size. The Allies gave the Germans the impression that they were to land on the eastern part of the channel, and the Germans deployed their strongest forces there. This lessened the German strength in Normandy, where the Allies actually intended to land.
Deception.
Most of the Allies landed with little difficulty. In the next few days, they completed their second objective by linking up all of their forces in the area. The Germans concentrated most of their reserves to the eastern section to cover the way into central France. The western sector did not get enough reinforcements. The Americans broke the German line and cut off their forces around Cherbourg. The Germans pulled back and attempted to dig in around the town. But the American pursuit did not give them the time to do that, and they were forced to surrender, leaving Cherbourg in Allied hands. By that time, the Germans had lost the opportunity to push the Allies into the sea.
Taco Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday? Too much of a good thing? Mix things up with Cholula.
Don't copyright me.
They had deployed only several hundred. Germans had lost the opportunity to push the Allies into the sea. They had deployed only several 100,000 soldiers, while the Allies had already landed 1 million men. During the next month, the Allies launched several offensives. In the eastern sector, the British pushed the Germans back and gained control of Caen and the terrain. In the eastern sector, the British pushed the Germans back and gained control of Caen and the terrain around it. At the same time, the Americans crossed through difficult terrain and reached ground more favorable for starting a larger offensive. By late July, the Allies...
This is where you really got to pay attention. All right. Thomas, pay attention. All right.
...had achieved a strong superiority and were ready to launch the Breakout. The strong German force in the east kept the Allied attacks at bay, but in the west, the Americans were able to break through the German lines. The German divisions in the north attempted to escape the encirclement, but several of them were destroyed. The Germans now had little strength to stop the Allies, and the Americans were soon in the open country. With the front broken and their troops outnumbered, the reasonable decision for the Germans might have been to pull their forces back. However, they chose to counterattack and close the Breakout forces' supply route. The Allies originally planned to concentrate on capturing the ports in Brittany.
What is his goal?
To pull their forces back. However, they chose to counterattack and close the Breakout forces' supply route. The Allies originally planned to concentrate on capturing the ports in Brittany, but
I spoke too soon and he was about to explain it to me.
When they realized that the main German force was not going to retreat, they turned their troops east to try to encircle the Germans. The German attempts to cut off the Allied Breakout had failed. They were able to contain the Anglo-Canadian attack from the north, but when the Americans approached from the south, the Germans had no choice but to retreat to avoid an encirclement. The withdrawal was delayed up.
I love how that's such a common tactic throughout time, throughout history. Just, you know, whether it's learning about, you know, Caesar or this or Napoleon, just, it's always kind of offensive, just try and encircle and take POWs or kill the enemy and in a defensive way, try and recognize when they're trying to do a flanking maneuver and then get away before they complete it, or just full. I find that cool how that's pretty steady trend throughout time.
To the last moment, and this would cost them dearly in the following weeks. A lot of the German mobile forces were able to escape the encirclement, but most of their infantry divisions were cut off and forced to surrender. The remaining German troops now attempted to establish a new defensive line on the Seine River. However, the Allies had anticipated that. As they were closing the pocket, they had already sent their troops towards the Seine. It pushed away weak German resistance and established a breachhead over the river. As a result, the Germans were unable to easily access the eastern part of the river. The Allies used this fact and raced east themselves. They established their positions along the eastern Seine before the Germans could dispatch significant forces to counter them. The German garrison in Paris...
So what is communication like? They have electronic walkie-talkie. What is there? I know in like movies, I sometimes see them carrying, like those guys would be assigned to like carry around this big, like pretty much like a mobile telephone, like but just like you had to carry it on your back, and you had this big clunky whatever, but that was obviously wireless, and so it's crazy how that'll change the pace of battle when you watch kind of the Napoleonic War stuff, or earlier than World War II, where communication is so much more of a liability.
Paris was left isolated and surrendered to the Allies on the 25th of August. The Allies had gained the upper hand in France, and they had now established more ambitious objectives. One was to capture the main German industrial area in the Ruhr. Occupying it would severely reduce the German ability to maintain their war effort. The second objective was securing the channel ports in order to improve the Allied supply situation. In their way, there was...
Wow, look how... I know I've been under the channel, but I always forget how close Great Britain is.
Several man-made and natural obstacles which the Germans could use for defense. The Allies' first move was an attack north into Belgium, which would move them closer to both of their objectives. The main goal of the Germans was to establish a new defensive line in the north and extract their forces intact from southern France. They deployed most of their available reserves to keep open the path of retreat. In the north, the Germans were constructing a new defensive line behind the Seine. They attempted to hold the Seine as long as possible and then pull their troops back to the new line. However, this could not be done. The Germans had not had the time to cover the eastern section of the river. The Allies crossed the river and advanced quickly northwards towards the main
just moving
German
so
defenses.
fast.
Then the Allies breached the German line in the center, and the Germans had no hope of holding them back. The Germans began belatedly withdrawing to their main defenses, but by that time, the Allies had already advanced beyond them. The Germans retreated in full speed to avoid being trapped, but they were unable to save all of their forces. The Allies linked up and cut off part of their troops. The Allies continued their advance north and trapped even more Germans near the sea. The remaining Germans continued a fast withdrawal to the east. They were able to successfully reach their new defensive positions on the Siegfried Line before the Allies. With Germany itself coming under threat, the Germans would deploy most of their reserve units to the front in the following weeks. The Allies now had to choose whether to concentrate on clearing the ports or the Ruhr. They decided to go for the Ruhr. There were two main obstacles separating the Allies from the Ruhr: the Siegfried Line and the Rhine River. The Allies decided to cross them by moving north in a single operation called...
Sorry, are you telling me that there's enough resistance in these ports that they can't... That's even... Why would they even have to choose between the two? There's that much resistance where they have to... Because I would think taking the Ruhr, is that what it's called, would also make the ports collapse, but obviously I don't know enough.
The Allies decided to cross them by moving north in a single operation called Market Garden. In this way,
That's a familiar
they would
name.
not have to deal with the Siegfried Line, and they would be able to cross the Rhine River with a surprise airborne assault. The paratroopers would capture the two bridges over the Rhine River at Arnhem and Nijmegen. Then, with the aid of other airborne drops, the ground forces would quickly link up with them and cross the Rhine in strength. The paratroopers landed, but they were unable to capture either of the bridges. With the help of the ground forces, the Allies were able to take the bridge at Nijmegen, but by that time the Germans had fully secured Arnhem. the path over the Rhine was closed, and the Allies were only able to rescue the surviving paratroopers. During the following weeks, the German reserves reached the front.
Were able or
The path
unable?
over the Rhine was closed, and the Allies were only able to rescue the surviving paratroopers. During the following
Able?
weeks, the German reserves reached the front. The Allies needed much more strength to breach the German defenses. In order to build it up, it was necessary to recover the Channel ports and improve the supply situation. The Allies were able to capture the port of Antwerp with its docking facilities intact. However, they had then concentrated on Market Garden and had not cleared out the approaches to Antwerp, which prevented its use. The Allies first captured Boulogne and Calais, but their facilities turned out to be so damaged by the Germans that they needed to open Antwerp. By that time, the Germans had heavily fortified the Antwerp approaches. The Allies now had to launch a difficult assault, and it took them more than a month to dislodge the German defenders. Clearing the water of mines took several more weeks, and only by late November the Allies had fully restored their supply flow. During that time, their other forces were fighting on the German border. In September, the Allies attempted to breach
Oh wait,
forces
the Germans are hunkered down in Dunkirk?
were fighting on the German border.
How the
In September,
turntables...
the Allies attempted to breach the German defenses in 3 locations, with the Operation Market Garden and with the attacks in the north and south of the Ardennes. In the north, they had to cross the Siegfried Line. The Allies made progress through the first line of defense, but the arrival of German emergency reinforcements halted them on the second line. After waiting to replenish their supplies, the Allies cut off Aachen from the German lines and captured the town. They then began building up supplies for another attack. In the south, the events played out somewhat differently. The Germans had deployed their early reinforcements to this sector and set up their defenses on the Moselle River in France. The Allies reached the area in early September, and when they had arrived in force, they broke into the German line and captured the town of Nancy. Then the Allies had to stop the offensive for 2 months to improve their supply situation. The Allied forces in the southernmost part of the front reached the area from southern France. After the Allies had broken out of Normandy, their forces landed in the south on the 15th of August. By that time, the Germans in the south had already sent a lot of their forces to Normandy and didn't have the strength to resist the Allies. They began to retreat north to the German border. The Americans began to pursue the retreating Germans. They moved north and attempted to cut the German path of retreat, but their forces were too weak to do that, and they were only able to inflict some casualties. The French forces arrived on the shore and moved to secure the major harbors. The morale of the German garrisons was low, and they fell after only brief resistance. The French prepared to join the pursuit on the American western flank.
Siege
The
of
American
Toulon
forces
round
were
2.
continuing the pursuit, but the Germans used their tank division to blunt their advances and were able to continue the retreat. Soon, the Germans made a stand to allow the German forces retreating from southwestern France to catch up.
Just laughing because Switzerland always hanging out on a fence.
The Germans made a stand to allow the German forces retreating from southwestern France to catch up. They were able to hold the line for some time, but then were compelled to continue the retreat. At that time, the Allied forces coming from southern France linked up with those coming from Normandy. The Germans finished their retreat. During the pursuit, they had lost around half of their troops, but they had brought out enough soldiers to man their section of the main German defensive line. By early November of 1944, the Allies were about to launch a major offensive into Germany along the whole front. The end of the war had never seemed so close, but what they did not know was that Germany had used the pause in fighting to prepare its own offensive.
Harambe.
They planned to use the pause in fighting to prepare its own offensive. They planned to launch a surprise attack in the near future and knock the Allies out of the war. How the events will play out, we'll see in the next episode.
What do you think, Tommy? Alrighty. Alright, that's great. I'm obviously going to get into part 2, either later today or tomorrow. Again, I don't want to start juggling too many things, with the main goal of getting my, main focus on Caesar and giving him as much attention as I gave Napoleon in the Epic History TV series. See you guys next time. Get on Discord. Alright, see ya.